Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to lesson 2 of our Boundaries Bible study. Help us spread the word to those who may need to hear us. They can join us live on Wednesday at noon or 6:30 p.m. If they can't get on right now, if you're watching on Wednesday at noon or 6:30, send them the link so that they can watch it later. If you are interested in sharing it with somebody, you can go to Facebook, Six Mount Zion Richmond. You can go to our YouTube channel, SMZBC Worships, SMZBC WORSHIPS. You can go to the web. Just go to the browser, meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC. And if nothing else fails, if all else fails, you can tell them to call 804-203-9011 and they can listen in. Sacred boundaries, finding peace and purpose in God's design. We're in week 2 of our journey, looking at what our boundaries are, why we need them, how God uses boundaries to protect our peace, how God uses boundaries to protect our purpose and our well-being. Last week, we introduced our 2 guiding resources for this study. The first one was Setting Boundaries, Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Tahab. And then the second book was Boundaries by Doctors Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Together, they help us understand that boundaries are healthy, that boundaries are necessary, that boundaries are deeply connected to the life that God desires for us. In our first lesson, we learned that boundaries are built into creation itself. God draws lines in Genesis, not to restrict humanity, but to create freedom, to create order, to create peace. So today, we're going to shift from the garden to the life of Jesus. We'll look at how Jesus handled constant demands, the nonstop expectations, and the weight of being needed by everyone and being needed everywhere. The Gospels show us something different, though. Jesus stepped away. Jesus withdrew. Jesus rested. And that choice, which can be seen as setting a boundary, teaches all that rest, solitude, and limits are not luxuries. They are part of a well-balanced life. As we enter the holiday season, this lesson becomes even more important. This is the time of year when calendars fill up, family expectations rise, and even as a church, we've got upcoming services with partner churches. November and December bring pressure, they bring expectations, they bring travel, traditions, family dynamics, grief, financial stress, and for some, a crowded calendar. Without boundaries, the season will be running us instead of us moving through it with peace. So today's lesson is about learning to say with Jesus, I love them, but sometimes I need to step away. Let's begin by hearing how Scripture introduces this pattern in Jesus' life in Luke 5:15-16.
Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed.
Crowds came because they were hurting. They wanted healing. They wanted hope. But even with real needs in front of him, Jesus often withdrew, quote unquote. Not once in a while, not at last resort, but often. This tells us that constant availability is not holiness. The Savior of the world stepped away, not because he didn't love the people, but because he loved God and needed space to stay grounded. One of the writers we're reading says boundaries are expectations and needs that help you feel safe and comfortable in your relationships. Another says boundaries show up where we end and others begin. Jesus understood that his inner life, his energy, and his time with God were all worth protecting. Now, let's look at how the Gospel of Mark shows us the same boundary, but with an entirely different angle.
Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed,
"Everyone is looking for you."
Jesus replied,
"Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come."
In this text, the disciples approached Jesus with urgency. Everyone is looking for you. Translation: their problems, their needs, their expectations. There's more to do. But Jesus didn't apologize. Jesus didn't rush. Jesus doesn't drop everything and run back to the crowd. Instead, after a long time with God, Jesus says, let's go somewhere else. That's why I came. Rest clarifies purpose. Solitude protects assignment. Boundaries keep us aligned with what God has called us to do, not what people pressure us to do. Boundaries around rest are not just about naps or free time, stepping away from work. Boundaries around rest are declarations of identity. What they do is they say to us, my body is not a machine. My mind deserves quiet. My spirit needs connection with God. I cannot serve well when I'm running on empty. In the Boundaries book, it's written, we cannot do it all, and we should not even try. Healthy boundaries around rest sound like, here's an example. I'm unavailable tonight. I need to recharge. Here's another one. I can't commit to another event right now. I'm sorry. Here's another one. I love you, but this conversation going to have to wait until I have the capacity to deal with it. Remember, boundaries are not selfish. They give us space about honoring the body and the spirit that God created. Now, let's go back to the Old Testament and see how God builds rest into creation and into community life.
Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
Sabbath is not a suggestion. It is actually a boundary. God sets aside 1 day out of 7 and declares it holy. So stop, rest, breathe, reflect, be still even. This command was especially powerful for people who had been enslaved in Egypt. Pharaoh didn't allow days off. Pharaoh demanded endless productivity. But in the wilderness, God interrupts that oppressive rhythm. You're no longer slaves, God says. You will rest. So Sabbath is God's boundary line against burnout, against exhaustion, against overwork, against exploitation. It's a divine way of God saying your worth is not in what you produce. Boundaries around rest are necessary for all of us. It's a human need. Some of us grew up with the belief that we must always be strong, always be available, always be capable. Others grew up thinking asking for rest was weakness. But Jesus withdrew. The divine commanded the Sabbath, and humanity was created with limits. So rest is not a personality trait. It's a spiritual practice. It is how all of us, regardless of gender, regardless of role, regardless of age or background, honor the image of God within us. Setting boundaries around rest is not running away. It is returning to yourself. It is reclaiming what the world, what work or expectations have drained. It is believing that God could run the universe for a few hours without your constant attention. Now let's talk about this holiday season, especially Thanksgiving, since this will be our last Bible study before that particular holiday. To be sure, Thanksgiving can bring joy, it can bring good food, it can bring meaningful connection, but it can also bring old patterns that drain us, complicated family dynamics, financial pressure, expectations about who's going to host, who's going to travel, who's going to cook, emotional weight from people who bring more stress than peace, grief for loved ones who are no longer here. This is why boundaries are essential during the holidays, because without boundaries, Thanksgiving can become emotionally overwhelming, spiritually draining, financially stressful, relationally tense, and physically exhausting. With boundaries, though, Thanksgiving can become intentional, peaceful, joyful, manageable, grounded in truth, love, and choice. Just as we listened last week, we have another licensed mental emotional health professional in our church, Sister Charnessa Pleasant, who's going to come and share some more with us, just like we had Dr. Jessica Brown last week. Sister Charnessa Pleasant is going to come and share some more about setting boundaries.
Hey everyone, my name is Charlie Pleasant. I am a licensed clinical therapist here in the Richmond, Virginia area, and I want to talk to you about boundaries today. We are at the holiday season where this is typically a time of joy, gathering, and celebration, but for a lot of people, this can be a really stressful time and a really difficult time for a lot of different reasons. So boundaries is what I want to talk about today. And how we can move towards setting some boundaries that can help us ease into the season and move through the season a little bit more peacefully and with a little bit more joy and being grounded in ourselves. So oftentimes when we think about boundaries, we think about them in the moments when we feel like we need to speak up. But the truth is, establishing and maintaining boundaries is really about the prep work you do prior to the moment of you having to actually enact them, right? Or actually set a boundary up. So boundaries are just simply deciding what works and what doesn't work for you, what you will accept, what you won't accept, right? That's just a really kind of quick and fast way of talking about boundaries. And overall, your boundaries are rooted in, I believe, one thing in one area only is your core values. If you're not clear on what you value, things like mutual respect, emotional and physical safety, being seen and heard and loved and honored and nurtured in a space. If you're not clear about what you value as an individual, it becomes really that much more harder to maintain or even implement a boundary. But once you're able to name what you value, that's your roadmap. That's your metric. That's your measuring tool that you use when people begin to step on your boundaries. Because if your core values are being violated, that's where you're setting your boundaries up from, is your core. So using that as your roadmap. So first and foremost, I want you to get clear about what you value. Next step is that I want you to begin to identify the consequences of when someone violates your boundaries. This is important for many reasons. One of the biggest reasons that this is important for is it lets people know that your boundaries are real, that you are really serious about how you want to be respected or how you want to be treated in a space. That's the core of setting up boundaries, is to let people know you can't do these things to me, right? You can't act that way. You can't behave that way towards me or anybody else. But this is also the time that I've observed when people kind of jump ship and abandon actually implementing their boundaries, because a lot of people become really concerned about how others are going to respond when they implement or set up a boundary for themselves. My hard and fast rule about that is two things. Number one, you can't control how other people respond to you. But number two, set the boundary anyway. And I want you to ask this question. If you become afraid to set boundaries, I want this question to anchor you to get back on track and actually setting them and implementing not only your boundaries, but your consequences for the violation of your boundaries. I want you to ask yourself, is staying in this relationship, staying in this community, staying in this space worth abandoning myself, my core values, my happiness, and my joy? You want to get clear on that answer. If it's more important to you that other people feel comfortable at your expense, then you're always going to feel dysregulated, upset, carry resentment, a lot of anger. When you set boundaries, you're showing yourself first and foremost that I honor who I am. And then you're teaching everybody else in your environment how to interact and honor you. So the question might be, what happens when somebody violates my boundaries, right? So first and foremost, I want you to think about taking immediate action. One of the things that we like to do is when somebody hurts us is to kind of and this is not everybody, but we kind of want to sweep that thing under the rug and not address it. That's not healthy. That leads to the go along to kind of get along and not address the core issue that might be happening between you and the person that you're in relationship with. So I want to encourage you, if the time is appropriate, to take immediate action to address the person that has violated your boundary. And you want to repeat the boundary if they continue to ignore you or ignore that boundary that you're setting up. A lot of times I tell my clients, expect people to push back on your boundaries because they're not used to not having access to you emotionally or in a particular kind of way. That does something for people when we finally kind of stand in ourselves and say, no, this is not acceptable. They're gonna push back. That's okay. That's a part of the process. Set the boundary anyway. That's my hard and fast rule. And I want you to follow up with immediate action. I want you to repeat your boundary to the person if they continue to ignore what your boundary is. And then I want you to follow through with the consequences. So as you set consequences for certain boundaries being violated, your follow through lets people know that I'm serious and that this is real and that we cannot move forward if you continue showing up in our relationship in this way. So if the behavior does persist, I really want you to give an honest consideration or review of the relationship. That might, in the immediate moment, this might look like walking away, removing yourself completely, driving separately to the event, or just not attending the event at all. But in a long term look at this, I want you to start thinking about, I need to look at this relationship. This person is constantly violating my boundaries, no matter how much I communicate to them that this does not feel good for me. I would advise you or encourage you to seek out the guidance and support of a professional, a licensed mental health professional that can help you navigate difficulties in relationships this way. But if you continuously notice this, you got to begin to pay attention to it. So I know everybody's situation is different during the holidays. Everybody's relationship with their family is different. It's hard to give really specific advice here. So I'm just giving you some general things. Take immediate action. Repeat your boundaries if they're being ignored. Follow through on your consequences if people continue to violate those boundaries, and then remove yourself if need be. And then in a long term, I want you to begin to think about, is this relationship worth staying in? So these are just a couple of tips that I have about boundaries. I would love to talk about this a little bit more, but if you have any additional questions, please reach out and let me know. And I hope y'all have a really peaceful and restful holiday season, and I'll see y'all soon. Bye.
Thank you, Charnessa Pleasant, for that challenge and that word. In case you're already feeling overwhelmed with the thought of next week, hear the invitation that Jesus gives to every weary soul, as found in Matthew 11:28 through 30.
Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light.
Listen to that promise, rest for your soul. Jesus is not recruiting more exhaustion. Jesus is not telling you to add tasks to your to-do list. Jesus actually invites you to rest. Rest does not mean stop living. Rest means that we learn a new rhythm, one that keeps us aligned with God instead of chasing every demand placed on us. Boundaries help us live in that rhythm. They remind us that anything that consistently steals our peace may need a line around it. Now, before I end, I want to say that I believe many of us already know the boundaries that we need. What gets us is the guilt, though. We worry, will they be disappointed? Will they be mad? Will I look selfish? Will I be judged for doing something different? But hear this, let it free you. Love without boundaries is not love. It is resentment wrapped in a smile. God never asks us to sacrifice our well-being for the approval of other people. Boundaries help our yes be true, and boundaries help our no be holy. They make our love sincere instead of strained. They help us show up where we are truly called, not where we feel coerced. That's our lesson for the week. I hope it's helpful. Remember, there is no Bible study next Wednesday, November the 26th. So I pray that for the next 2 weeks, you protect your peace by practicing at least one boundary around rest. For those of you heading into our after Bible study chat, you're watching on Wednesday, either at noon or at 6:30. You can get there 3 ways. Download the Dialpad Meeting app, Dialpad Meetings app. Number 2, go to meetings.dialpad.com in your browser /SMZBC, SMZBC. And then finally, if you can't do either one of those or don't want to, just call 804-203-9011. Again, thank you for joining us. We don't take it for granted. May God bless.